Thank you, everybody, for joining us today, for dialing in from wherever you are on this exciting session. It's on EdTech. As you all know, because of COVID-19 in the last 8 months, we've all been at home. Those of us who are fortunate, we've been working from home. Many of us who are not so fortunate cannot do that. This has had impact across different sectors, and of course, education is one of them. Education has moved online where possible, and where it's not possible, many kids have been left out, and they have basically been missing out on learning. And this has important consequences down the road. So today we have a very exciting panel on looking at use of technology on education. The promise of technology in education has always been there. And I think there's never been a time quite like this where we are able to experiment use of technology in really providing access to education, but also how do we improve learning outcomes? And this is something that we have been grappling with in our part of the world. Learning outcomes have not been very encouraging, but they have been improving in the last few decades, but still there's a long way to go. And with learning outcomes, I mean by looking at assessment, students' ability to really, they're spending more time in school, but are they learning things? Are they learning in school? And that's something that sort of, we call it the second generation problem. The first generation problem was about getting them to school. Now the second generation is about ensuring that they are actually learning, right? Because in the end, for GDP growth, for long run prosperity, learning is what matters. And this is something that, most my esteemed panelists today, they're all very well aware, so they have dedicated their lives and their careers working in education. So I'm gonna quickly introduce the panelists so you all know who is talking today. And then once I introduce the panelists, I'll invite them to give their opening remarks for a few minutes, 5 minutes or less, and then we'll go on to panel discussion. So the opening remarks will focus on some of the work that they're doing in this space, in the space of EdTech. So we've got Colin Marson. Colin is the head of Google for Education. And Google for Education's mission is to expand what, where, and how students learn so that everyone has access to the quality education that they deserve. We are excited to have Colin. He's based in Singapore, and he leads Google's education efforts in the Asia Pacific region. And we've got Sarah Pouezevara. Sorry, Sarah, it's difficult to pronounce your last name. She's at RTI International. She's a senior education research analyst and an EdTech specialist. She's been working in this space for the last 20 years. She's done a lot of work in the last few years, especially in Southeast Asia, and I have no doubt she'll be presenting some of the work they have done in the Philippines, especially recently. And we've got Vincent Kwa. Vincent is at AWS. Vincent, in a way, I call him the guru of EdTech. In the EdTech space in Asia Pacific, is very well aware of what's happening, especially the startup space. We're excited to have Vincent. He's got wide, deep experience in the space of education and especially using technology in education. I recently attended a conference in Singapore with EdTech startups, a really exciting event. So I'm very glad to have Vincent join this panel discussion. And we've got Janine Teo. She's the founder and CEO of Solve Education. She is an innovator. One of the ways he's trying to change solve education, not to use the term itself, Janine, I'm sorry, but of course a great name for a firm like yours. Solve learning challenges in education, and she's doing that quite well in our region, and in Indonesia. They have been making use of mobile technology to do just this. And excited to have Janine on this panel. Janine is also an advisor at the Asian Development Bank on digital technology for development. Great to have Janine, and I look forward to listening to her. And we have Robert Smith. Robert Smith is the Higher Education and eResearch Lead APAC at Microsoft. He has been in the industry for the last 15 years, and he's been working in the Asia Pacific region. And today he will share with us some of the work that they have been doing in the region on education. So as you can see, we've got a very diverse panel with different sets of background and experiences. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite each panelist to start with their opening presentation. First, over to you, Colin. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Colin Marson. I'm head of Google for Education for APAC. Thank you so much for having me here today, amongst other really esteemed speakers. Look forward to the conversations. I'll just spend a couple of minutes and give a quick introduction to what we're seeing, as well as what Google for Education is doing in the region. Over the last several months, really, teaching and learning around the world has been upended in really unprecedented ways, right? COVID-19 has resulted in schools shut across the world. Globally, we're seeing 1.2 billion children were out of the classroom. As educators worldwide really have reinvented their practice with passion, with creativity, with a lot of commitment, we've been honored to be able to do what we can to work on solutions that sort of lighten the load of these real heroes. So technology has become increasingly important in this context of distance learning. Of course, many schools across the region were already in the process of digitizing, but COVID-19 has really accelerated this adoption. And our view is that while technology alone won't fix or on its own improve education, we are optimistic that it can be a significant part of improving educational outcomes. So Google for Education is a solution built for learning and really designed for the classroom. It includes easy to manage affordable devices like Chromebooks, managing teaching and learning through Google Classroom, and a powerful suite of collaboration tools with G Suite for Education. We've heard from many of our educators that using Google Classroom and Google Meet have helped ease the transition to distance learning. The basics of Classroom in particular, the ability for teachers to communicate effectively with their students, to hand out work paperlessly, and to provide sort of meaningful and real-time feedback have never been more important than they are today. And the simplicity, ease of use, and integrations of these tools with G Suite have made them approachable to many millions of new users, and we've seen that really grow rapidly. Let's see. As I mentioned, we know technology alone isn't a fix, and there were definitely other factors we had to consider to ensure that technology was effective in remote learning. Our approach every person in the education system, whether they're government officials, students, teachers, IT administrators, or parents and guardians. Through this feedback, we recently launched a lot of new features to help with, first of all, moderation, so designed to keep classrooms safe and teachers in control. Second, engagement, so including features like digital whiteboards, breakout rooms, and polling. Thirdly, visibility, with the goal of helping educators and school leaders know who's engaged while learning at home. And fourthly, access and reliability. So, of course, our commitment to ensuring that the services are available to as many learners as possible all the time. Additionally, it was important to ensure that teachers, parents, and students were equipped with the skills to use these tools, right? So in some cases, the transition to online learning was rapid, and so there's insufficient training and preparation for teachers, parents, and students alike. We therefore launched Teach from Anywhere as a hub for information and resources to help teachers, schools, and families with remote learning during this time, with information ranging from basic questions like how to start a video call with your class to how to ensure children's online safety for parents. We also been working closely with groups of passionate educators, so Google Educator groups, both online and at locally run events offline. They've been instrumental in sharing the best practices and tips proactively to other educators who might be new to teaching online. As rightly pointed out by the title of this discussion, so a key element of remote learning is ensuring access, and that no one gets left behind is vitally important during this time. So we look at access technology in a few different ways. Access for students with disabilities, access for students with limited access to the internet and computers, and access for underserved communities. Our tools are really designed to be accessible for as many students as possible, including students who have disabilities or require a hands-on approach in the classroom. For example, live transcribe, for people who are hard of hearing, who might rely on lip reading, the widespread use of masks can really make it hard to know what people are saying. So one helpful tool in this situation is our live Transcribe app, which helps people get transcriptions in real time of the conversations happening around them or the class that's being taught remotely. We understand that not everyone has access to stable internet connections or computers needed for remote learning. So we're committed to directing our resources, so our products, programs, philanthropy, and people towards making education accessible for everyone. Most G Suite apps are available on iOS and Android, as well as Chrome and other platforms. So students can also participate if they only have access to a smartphone. And on the product end, we're working to make sure our tools continue to work offline, so students, even with intermittent connectivity, can continue to engage in the learning process. Earlier this year, Google.org, which is our philanthropic arm, also launched a $10 million distance learning fund specifically aimed at helping educators across access the resource that they need, particularly in underserved communities. So, for example, in the Philippines, our grant supported the Asian Institute of Journalism and Communication through the nonprofit INCO to provide training and coaching to public school teachers who then in turn help underprivileged students and access high quality home learning. So the project has reached about 250 high school teachers and therefore 12,500 senior high school students in Metro Manila through this project alone. All that I've shared, of course, cannot be done by Google or any of the private sector players alone. So on the education front, we've been working closely with local ministries of education and remain committed to these partnerships. It's been encouraging to see governments and the private sector come together to address the challenges brought about by this pandemic. In order for us to truly reap the benefits of technology and ensure access for all, it's vital, as Ambassador Osias mentioned earlier, that policymakers and the technology industry work together towards these kind of common goals. So thank you, and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thank you, Colin. That was an excellent presentation. And thank you, Colin. That was an excellent presentation. I'm so glad that you brought up the issue of the teachers having the ability to sort of be able to teach students through use of technology, through online platforms. This is something that we took it for granted, right? When we enter into the crisis, when students were forced to stay at home, we just assumed that teachers would be able to make that transition easily as well. And that has not been the case. And it's great to see some of the tools that Google has developed to really sort of help in that effort. Really exciting. I'm looking forward to the panel discussion later on. Now I'm going to invite Sarah. Sarah has been doing a lot of research on this EdTech space as well, looking at what works in EdTech and some of the efforts in Southeast Asia. So looking forward to listening to her. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Samir. I'm Sarah Pouezevara. I'm with RTI International. And what I want to share today is this model for equitable EdTech scaling that RTI developed a few years ago with Omidyar Network. And we've been applying it more recently in the Philippines with the support of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. And it's a model that describes the conditions for scaling education technology equitably and with impact. So I think all of us are here today as educators and researchers, and we all want to make sure the focus stays on, putting education back in EdTech. Don't worry, I'm not going to describe all of the details of this model, and I don't even expect you to be able to read all of the small print, but I just want to focus on the concept of the ecosystem for education technology implementation, which is made up of all of these interrelated parts. So you've probably heard ecosystems used in the context of EdTech startups or the business ecosystem, but we think this concept really applies equally to scaling education technology equitably and with impact. And that happens precisely because the products and models are used in the right ways, and they're reaching the right learners at the right time. So this really requires interaction between all of these parts. So of course, there's the supply side factor related to EdTech products, which is in blue, the quadrant in blue, and how potential users access those products. And of course, there's also infrastructure. I think we're all acutely aware of that right now. EdTech depends on a certain amount of electricity and increasingly internet to really thrive. And that's for distribution reasons, as well as pedagogical reasons. But importantly, there's also the policy and human capacity sides of the equation, which are the green and gray quadrants there, which are really critical for creating and sustaining demand for the products, and then introducing the unique context and individual specific application of technology that creates true impact. So as investors, entrepreneurs, policymakers, development partners, whoever you are today, listening to this panel, I want to ask us to be mindful of these categories and the strengths and weaknesses of their interactions, which is where impact really comes from. For example, it doesn't matter if you have a great EdTech innovation if teachers don't know how to use it effectively within the curriculum, or if parents can't access it because they don't have bandwidth, or the traditional system simply discourages its use because there's a focus on test preparation or something else. So ecosystem factors need to really deliberately work across these silo areas and collaborate. So right now, there's lots of emphasis on access for good reason, but access to a bad product or inappropriate online pedagogy is certainly not what anybody is advocating for. So when we take this ecosystem model at its core, we can apply it to different countries to create an ecosystem profile. So as you'll see from these different profiles, there is no one right way to create impact at scale. Each ecosystem is unique, and that's exactly the point. The Philippines is relatively strong in some areas, in human capacity and local leadership, but it's been missing a strong central policy and vision for education technology until quite recently. On the other hand, Indonesia had a very strong national policy for education, but it was missing some of the mechanisms for holding schools accountable and providing specific funding opportunities to make these visions a reality. And again, China, at least at the time of this report, had very strong investment opportunities and lots of capital for entrepreneurs, high curricular expectations that created a performance pressure to use EdTech, but it was missing some strategies to bring EdTech to the classroom and build capacity for impactful use. So while all of these countries have been successful in their own ways, the framework really invites us to question whether they could achieve more success by looking at the weaker connections and leveraging the stronger ones and just creating more connections in general. So importantly, at the center or surrounding this model, however you want to look at it, is the idea of maintaining a focus on the true value add of the technology, the pedagogical appropriateness for learning, and really building the capacity to understand the opportunities and affordances of technology based on their functions as they relate to pedagogical processes. And the point is to scale the impact of technology, not just a product. So if I had to just sum it all up, I think really the dynamic between private sector and public sector is really critical. That was echoed a bit in what Colin just said. We have to make sure there is collaboration and not one side controlling more than the other. So maybe we can get back to that in the panel discussion, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. That was an excellent presentation. Really great to hear you talk about how we don't want to scale up any EdTech product. We want to scale up an EdTech product that actually works, that has a track record of being successful. And really, that's a very important point. And on that, and it's great to invite Vincent to speak, because Vincent has seen a lot of EdTech startups come through his offices. Really, not all of them usually tend to be aligned with some of the challenges in the education sector faces. Some of the EdTech products sort of are, they're shiny, as our VP this morning sort of pointed out. They're nice, cool gadgets and products, but not all of them are sort of aligned with what the country is actually facing and given the needs at the local context. So Vincent, over to you to speak a bit more about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir, and thank you, ADB, for inviting AWS to this esteemed event. It's a privilege for me to participate, especially amongst all the other panelists as well. It is true that the pandemic has really caused a big shift, a tectonic shift in the way education is being addressed and trying to overcome the challenges that has been posed by the pandemic. I just want to start by offering a few observations, and then I'll go on to some examples of how we have worked with education technology partners in helping them deliver the solutions for the education sector. And then I'll have a last piece, a third piece, which I think is going to be very important, and I'll come back to that at a later stage. From the observation standpoint, when the pandemic hit, and it came really, really rapidly, what has been observed is that government needed to rapidly scale their responses. Any kind of responses, right? Whether that is about keeping their citizens safe, protecting jobs, driving the economy and maintaining the economy where possible, and then preventing more and more infection, healthcare, and all that stuff. The operative word in the first observation is that they have to respond rapidly and to be able to scale their responses. So that's the first observation. The second observation is that higher education in particular also has to respond to a high degree of uncertainty, whatever that uncertainty they need, right? So many institutions are not going to be opening. What are the areas that really the higher education institutions are needing support for? Financial health and operational planning, how to do it. New instructional technology and ideas and thinking around pedagogy and andragogy. Thirdly, how then to provide better student support services when everybody is online. That's the second observation. The third observation is that I think we're seeing this that in the case of the primary and the secondary school segment, new models are being tested out. When the schools are closed, what options do you actually have other than to go online? And if you do not have a digital strategy, well, you are then in a need to scale up really rapidly with a digital solution. And where are you going to get that? You can't build it. And your best source of it is actually education technology company. That brings me to where then are the things that's happening around us, whether is it in the migration of applications and services to the cloud, to our education technology customers and stepping up and providing that capability to the schools and institutions, or the creation of new apps. I just want to talk about a few examples that highlight the rapid scaling, right? The ability to address the lockdown and the closure. For example, the Jordanian government were able to quickly pivot with an EdTech that we work with so that they can provide, more than 2 million students access to classes online. And since, a very short period of time, it's in a 1 or 1.5 week period, more than 35 million views of the classes were already taking place. Pretty amazing. In the second example, and that's just in India, right? We see one education technology company by the name of Impartus. They launched virtual classes at no costs. And we, of course, help them in the ability to scale up and to support more than 90 institutions that just this one EdTech were able to onboard, right? In that, again, very short period of time, reaching 32,000 teachers and more than 500,000 students. Just one EdTech. So you can imagine the multiplier effect of education technology companies. Bringing the last example much closer to home is the example of CMAC Online. An Indonesian EdTech has very, very quickly pivoted again, working with the Ministry of Education and Culture in Indonesia in bringing more than 100 new schools into their platform and supporting them with exam questions and able to deliver more than 2.3 million exams with over 600 exam questions in their data bank. These are the things that our EdTechs are able to do. And it's something that they are looking to scale up even more. But the third is an area that I'm just going to leave it out there, and is in the area of skill acquisition and skill development by our young people. I think that is a major topic that we need to be thinking about and to be talking about. Back to you, Samir.
Thank you, Vincent. One of the things that you pointed out in your presentation is that, when we talk about technology, of course, there's a range of different technologies, right? So there's something very important to keep in mind, that we're not just talking about digital platforms, we're not just talking about iPhones, we're talking about a range of technology that is available to move education and learning online. And one simple example, as sending a text message to parents during dinner time, tends to do wonders when it comes to kids completing their homeworks and doing well in test scores. And this is something, an encouraging sign also we are seeing in this space of EdTech. Now I would like to invite Janine Tios. She's the CEO of Solve Education. The title Solve Education really sums up what she's trying to do. As we know, in Southeast Asia, learning outcomes have been relatively weak. So she's trying to change that, in her own ways. And so one of the technologies that she's using is on mobile technology. So over to you, Janine.
Thank you, Samir and ADB, for having me and Solve Education as part of this meaningful discussion. So I have to say and preface this right out front is that EdTech is not a magic bullet. At the end of the day, think of technology as an enabler, and without good and strong sound pedagogy or great design, tech cannot, the product at the end of the day will not be effective. So we really, as the EdTech ecosystem, really invite governments, teachers, parents, and other experts to be part of the ecosystem and come up with their solution together. What I see in this space, during the pandemic and now that we are talking about post-pandemic days, is that before the pandemic in the EdTech ecosystem, there's usually just those crazy innovators, EdTech people. But now we start to see more and more practitioners and other stakeholders being part of the conversation. And I am really, really optimistic what are the different approaches and innovations that we can all achieve together. With that, just a quick introduction about what Solve Education does. So Solve Education alleviates people out of poverty through education and employment, leveraging on technology. Our mission is to build an open platform that provides everyone with access to effective education. And we focus on first the fundamental education, teaching people how to learn, then moving on to job-specific skills, and finally linking up people up with jobs. So we offer two products to date. One product, as Samir was mentioning, is an educational game platform as form of a mobile app, which can be learned. You can learn both offline and online. And another product actually was inspired by our existing users pre-COVID period, where they set up WhatsApp groups to learn. And we have evolved that into a product, which is a chat teacher product where people learn and chat with the teacher. So that has really taken off during COVID times as well. So today we are in over 7 countries, mainly in South ASEAN, South Asia or Africa. And what we do is that we partner and support initiatives of governments, grassroots communities, and NGOs to help them, achieve their learning outcomes. With that, I think, thank you very much. I look forward to this exciting discussion.
Thank you, Janine. One of the things, just to make it more tangible, just to give an example of what Janine has been doing in terms of skills development, because when we hear of skills development and training using technology, people wonder, TVET, with TVET, we think about, how to fix a fridge or a car. That type of TVET education, of course, it's important. But one of the things that Janine is doing with her team in Indonesia is, for example, for taxi drivers to learn English language, to pick up foreign riders at the airport or something like that. For Gojek drivers, also learn English or English using mobile phones. And that's a real skills that a lot of these drivers need when they're trying to get customers. And so that's one space where Janine is also working on in Indonesia. Now I'm going to invite our last panelist, last but not the least, Rob Smith. He's at Microsoft. So he's going to tell us a bit more about some of the products that they have been developing in this space and what they've been doing the last several months in the wake of COVID-19. Thank you. Over to you.
Thanks, Samir, and thank you all for having us. Really exciting to be part of this panel and this discussion. In the wake of the pandemic and building on some of the conversations we've just heard from some of my esteemed colleagues, our CEO stated not long ago that we've seen over 2 years of transformation across all industries in the last couple of months. And I think everybody here is feeling that to a certain degree. And interestingly, if we look back probably just 6 to 9 months, some of the surveys we were doing across industries and across education specifically in Asia Pacific, we were getting the feedback that less than half of the institutions and ministries had a digital transformation or an education transformation plan or strategy in place. Now, I must say, I think this is the busiest time I've had in my past 6 years being here in Asia and seeing those transformation journeys either accelerate or kick off for the first time. And I think that we're seeing that across different organizations in different ways. I think the end goal is ultimately still the same, but where individuals are on their journey, be it students, educators, parents, or institutions, is requiring a different approach in each area. And we've tended to use some of the McKinsey views of the world in framing the response to the pandemic around the initial response, then the recovery, and then the reimagine. And ultimately, that reimagine phase is aligning to what we had seen around the transformation opportunity in education, although that's not where we want to start and where we want to get to. And I will say the last 6 months have seen us, and like others have mentioned on the discussion already, the uptake of technology, sometimes whatever technology was available, just simply to respond and keep continuity of education. But thankfully, and really respect goes out to the leaders of our education systems and institutions, we're absolutely seeing the view to move more to a recovery phase and move to focus around student well-being, a focus around engagement, and then are moving away from just continuing education to start to focus on some of the other areas that were mentioned a moment ago around skills. What are the skills that we can help students develop in this current time? And then also, what role can the education systems of today play in the reskilling the workforce of today as well? The huge impact of COVID on jobs and on many of the industries that we thought were robust. I think the airline industry as a great example, seeing highly qualified and skilled workers in a profession that I don't think anyone felt would be disrupted. We're seeing them seeking to reskill and identify opportunities to make career changes. And I think that's just one example. But we're seeing universities approaching us to understand how they can play their part and how we can partner with them. And to Colin's point earlier, this is not something that a technology company or the institutions can do themselves. I think it will be very much a combination of multiple of those elements. And I think we're seeing examples of that in multiple countries. But also that respond piece, that how do we, and I think it's still a phase that many of us in Southeast Asia are in around that responding to the pandemic. We've seen examples such as Thailand, where they'll have at least 1 million active users online with online learning before the end of the year, just to keep higher education moving along. But the key to that, and I think a number of folks have also mentioned the uptake in the use of technology, is linked to something Sarah said earlier. The technology is around a quarter of this transformation and this recovery that we will see. How we work with our educators, how we work with policymakers, and how we can keep our students engaged, I think will be key to how we respond to the pandemic. So there's certainly some ambiguous and potentially daunting times that we're in right now and ahead of us, but it's fantastic to see some of the examples of leadership being shown and recovery being shown. As I mentioned, I spoke about Thailand earlier. We're seeing the same in Vietnam, the Philippines. We see some fantastic work happening there, and especially around that professional development, educator development piece. The pivot and focus around supporting our educators is really helping us see some of the recovery happening there as well. So I'll pause there myself, really looking forward to the discussion and welcoming some questions from you all. But again, thanks for having us.
Thank you, Rob, for that. The point you made about working together, working with teachers, educators, EdTech, the sort of the tech product developers, private sector players, and students. Of course, we need to engage everybody to really come up with a solution that works. So now we've finished our sort of opening remarks, but of course, a lot of you have already touched upon many of the questions that many of us are asking these last few months. And thank you for doing that. Just to kick off, I would like us to sort of go back to what Minister Nadeem this morning said. He highlighted that, yes, going into COVID-19, he was very excited about technology, and they're doing a lot of exciting things in Indonesia. There are 4 ongoing initiatives that are very nice in all the areas that you all have mentioned today. But he pointed out that the experience of the last 8 months, 6-8 months, has made him realize that there are challenges to using technology in education. There are challenges that for example, teachers can now be replaced so easily by AI. And one example that one of the panelists brought up was, unless somebody follows up, making sure the students complete the assessment when they're doing learning online, the completion rate is relatively low for example, the massive online courses, right? MOOCs. So in any case, so just to highlight that, of course, educators, teachers are very important in this space. Now, I would like to kick off our conversation by looking at, so what do you think have been some of the key challenges going beyond just the infrastructure? What are the key challenges for the promise of EdTech to really sort of give us, help us with a new sort of ecosystem or the education, sort of how we teach our students going forward? I'll start with Vincent. Vincent, over to you.
So thanks, Amir. I think, when we think about the pandemic, there are 2 set of problems that we're trying to solve. One is really a macro type of a problem, a scale problem, right? Getting as many students back to school. And we've seen how EdTechs have been a very instrumental part in standing up classes, allowing teachers to go online, allowing students to go online and learn as well. The second part of the challenge is really more down to a much more an individual level, and that is learning really happening at the individual? Is teaching being effective when the teacher is able to teach online? And there's a lot to unravel over there. And so depending on how you want to approach this, it is not a very simple, straightforward. Some subjects are more amenable to using technology to deliver teaching and learning, where some technology are not as amenable, like trying to do and solve a science problem vis-a-vis trying to write a literature essay. They're both very, very different type of problems. And therefore, the thinking and the using of different technology and specific technology to address some of these teaching and learning challenges has to be thought of and addressed.
Thank you, Vincent. On that, can I ask Colin to talk a bit about what Google is doing in this space? Because I couldn't emphasize this more, that the point that Vincent just made, that of course we have to be very aware in terms of whether students are learning when we have moved online, and this is something that's very critical. So is there something that Google is doing in this space? Could you share us your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very significant challenge, right? So, I mean, when we think about sort of what's happening, I think that the teachers are probably one of the key points, right? When we talk about implementation of technology, is pre-COVID as well as during COVID, getting students to understand how to use technology is not really the challenge, right? Getting teachers really skilled up in using the technology is typically a big area of focus, and that's why, not only for us, but many ministries of education, we collaborate a lot on doing that kind of upskilling so that the tools are going to be used well. For students in this environment, to some extent, it's getting that level of focus and really ensuring that they are engaging. And that is a challenge. And so we've been investing in a lot of additional product development to be able to support teachers in sort of gauging and improving engagement levels with students. So it is an ongoing challenge, and it's something I think there isn't necessarily one silver bullet for, but we have seen a lot of successes and a lot of on-the-ground innovation in terms of what teachers are doing and how we're supporting them, how different ministries of education are supporting them to help do that.
Thank you, Colin. On that, I'm going to ask Janine to reflect a bit on some of the work that you're doing with Solve Education Here, as you highlighted in your opening remarks, that you're using gamification as an approach to sort of teach students critical skills. Could you talk a bit about this in terms of sort of meeting students where they are, right? So in terms of technology, in terms of types of apps that they use in this space, could you talk a bit more about the work you're doing? Over to you, Janine.
Thank you, Samir. So from what I see in our work, there are two main challenges. One is efficacy and one is motivation. And efficacy involves a lot about how do we measure and how do we access learning outcomes. And there is this hard skills part of the learning outcomes, which I think most of us, at least in the educator group, right? They figure out how to measure. What's more challenging to measure is the soft skill side. So and that is still quite fuzzy. So if we don't really know how to exactly measure things like, you know, curiosity, or have we taught the student to become more collaborative, right? Then how do we know if we are effective or not? So I think that is still a challenge in this space. But the good news is that the hard skills, we have a very good sense of what success look like, and I've seen successful models being rolled out, including ours. We're able to collect different artifacts of students learning and acquiring the skills, and then build out their student success scorecard. So that has been really exciting for us to see. Now, from the motivation side, like you rightfully pointed out, when students are learning independently, the motivation kind of drops, right? And completion rates is a big struggle, even amongst adults, motivated adults like, you know, all of us here, right? MOOC's completion rate is notoriously low. And what more if they are youth or children, right? So it's quite a very high ask to expect children or youth to have their own intrinsic motivation to complete the courses that they are learning. So what we have experimented is, like you rightfully pointed out, gamification. And we found gamification be very effective, at least to break that barrier and have students start to attempt to learn. Because if it's something academic, their initial kind of thought is going to be boring, right? So we've seen that being very helpful, but we also are realistic that it's not effective to get people, it's not yet per se effective to get people to be engaged for months or even over a year. So other things that we are trying out are building, social networks like group challenges, or hanging out with friends and forming learning groups like the WhatsApp groups I was mentioning to you about. We have people in the WhatsApp group teaching each other and practicing English, right, for over a year. and they stick much longer with that community than anything else. So, that was something really interesting to see. I mean, of course, sometimes they're talking about what they have eaten for lunch, but many times they are really practicing new vocabulary, right? And hence the chatbot teacher became really helpful. So gamification is just a good starter, but I think social element seems to be a lot more sticky, especially with teenagers. And then lastly, using incentives. We have found incentives being, it seems really obvious, but having students go for incentives like what we have done, we have experimented big incentives like a scholarship from École Hôtelière de Lausanne for summer camp, or we have experimented small incentives like just a $5 phone credit, right? And what we have learned from these different experiments is that big incentives really just get very motivated students to go for it, and then the other people just fall out, right? So it's not really effective in getting a whole, like 1 million people going forward to that goal. But what we have found to be much more effective are smaller incentives, but group projects. And that seems to get more people excited about, and also with the element of peer pressure, get more people learning more often. And another thing that we are working on is putting in the sense of purpose, and that we are partnering with Max Planck Institute, as well as in Germany, as well as University of Tasmania in Australia. And we are with Max Planck Institute, we are partnering with their rational enhancement group, and it's about how do we use goal settings and other techniques to get people, almost get them set their own goals, and then hold themselves accountable. And they have already done experiments on that, and saw that people were able to stick to their own goals much better. And with Utah's University of Tasmania, it's more of behavioral science. So how do we use behavioral science technique to change behavior? Now this is still quite cutting edge, or quite new. Changing behavior is never easy. So I think we still need to be realistic and bear that in mind. I would love to run every day, and I know that that's good for me, but I don't end up doing that, right? So we would love our children to learn every day, and we welcome anybody with other ideas to try out. Yeah.
That's great, Janine. The mix between incentives, sort of giving incentives to students, and gamifying the process of learning. It is great combination. I think when the minister this morning mentioned about one of the interventions that's being done in Indonesia is encouraging parents at home when they're cooking or when preparing a meal to sort of ask the kids, how many potatoes do we need? How many tomatoes? Do we chop them up in, 4 parts or 2 parts? So then you kind of learn basic skill, basic math, sort of basic skills, right? And that's a sort of organic way of learning as well. But there's an incentive at the end of it, nice meal, right? So there's going to be a lunch. There might be no lunch if you don't help out in the kitchen. And this is from experience, having young kids, that if you actually engage them in that type of behavior, it is true that they do tend to help out, and it's really great to hear this. I want to invite Sarah into this conversation because Sarah has been looking at many sort of EdTech products, EdTech initiatives in our region, and not, of course, as she rightly mentioned, not all of them work, right? And this is something that I want to highlight because looking at this evidence in the before COVID, pre-COVID, let's just call it pre-COVID evidence on EdTech, not very encouraging. The World Development Report by the World Bank a couple of years ago, they came out saying most of the interventions in hardware, terrible outcomes, even negative, right? In software, small share with positive outcomes. In general, the aggregate wasn't that great. But then when you look at some programs like MindSpark in India, some of they're huge impact in terms of learning outcomes. So of course, it depends on what we are looking at, but the evidence in this space has been relatively mixed. So I'm curious, in the wake of COVID-19, maybe we have new evidence that shows that some of the initiatives that didn't work in the past, maybe are working better now, right? So Sarah, over to you just to reflect on this.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. I think it's what's on everybody's mind is, the learning outcomes, who's learning, who's not, is there equity or not? And I mean, we could do a whole nother panel on evaluating education technology. I think there's real problems with how the field has evaluated education technology to date. And it's often these big kind of without scenarios where you really don't know how the technology was actually implemented or how it was used. You can compare classrooms with technology to classrooms without, but do you know if the classrooms actually use the technology or not? I think that's been a real big gap. And when we have seen good product evaluations like MindSpark, I think the results are there. I was part of an evaluation of the Global Learning X Prize where they passed out tablet computers to children in Tanzania and then walked away for 18 months. It was incredible what children with collaboration from their families and their communities were able to do with this technology. Their gains were higher than a year in the classroom under most programs. It doesn't replace school, but it does a lot. So I think there's a challenge to evaluating education technology, but the real impact comes when the right technology is matched to the right child, the developmental level, the classroom context, the curriculum, the supportive teacher, and you're going to have impact. I believe you are. I don't believe that our big RCTs are ever really going to tease out how impactful that is. So I think the jury's still out right now as far as COVID and remote learning. Where's the impact going to come from? I think there's so much going on, and in the country where I'm working right now, Philippines, most closely, they've done a great job saying, well, everybody can't access the internet, so we also have to have TV, and we also have to have radio, and we also have to have print learning materials. But at the same time, so they're also spreading themselves thin in the quality and the impactfulness of each technology or each learning modality. And I think parents probably are confused about where to invest as well. If they have a bit of disposable income, or if they were able to get support from their local government, well, do they buy a radio or do they buy a TV, or is it better to just buy a mobile phone? That kind of leadership and vision and really strong guidance is needed to help parents and to concentrate, I think, efforts in one area for impact. Otherwise, I just don't know how we're going to even evaluate what's working, because everybody's using lots of small pieces of lots of different technologies. So, I think we're just starting on a research project in the Philippines about how people are accessing remote learning, and especially, critical early grade skills like reading, which are incredibly difficult to do with technology, because you really need eyes on print, you really need explicit instruction. So I think, maybe we'll have another opportunity some months from now to speak about impact.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Of course, when it comes to evaluation, I totally understand your point. So there is a bit of a debate, right? You have economists who want to do impact evaluation with experimental methods like RCTs, but then there are practitioners like many of us who actually want to do an evaluation that's relatively quick and easy to do, and then build on that, and then come up with, when you're in the space of product development, you don't have the luxury of time, 2-3 years, so, baseline survey to, the different series of surveys to really tease out the impact, right? So I leave that to the academic education economists out there. But for many of us, I think we have to sort of focus on what can we learn from, in the wake of COVID-19, and can we use it? Can we leverage it to improve how we deliver learning and education? And I'm going to invite Rob to in this conversation, basically Rob, if you could talk a bit about, of course, the promise of technology has always been there. And for example, even with artificial intelligence, right? Everybody is talking about AI, but very few, I'm not talking about us, but very few know that AI has been around for decades, right? Decades. In the 50s, they were talking about AIs. But what has changed fundamentally is data, is the data that we have and the data that gets fed into these systems. That's what gives us good working AI systems, right? So that's what has changed in the last several years, and important to keep in mind. So can you talk a bit about this, Rob, and what Microsoft is doing in this space in Asia Pacific region? Over to you.
And that's a topic really close to my heart. Without geeking out on anybody here, you may have heard the term that data is the new oil. We have data about so many things around, in education and outside of, but it's of no value to us until we can refine it. And the refining is what has changed since sort of the 1950s, the 1970s, the second cold AI period, where we are now seeing the compute power, powered by the cloud, to actually create insights from the data we have. I think I'd like to link this back to the conversation earlier around what's happening in even just this respond phase to the pandemic is we are digitizing learning. Whether we intended to or not, there is more digitization of learning. And the reimagining could be AI, robots, holograms replacing educators. And I don't think that's a benefit to anybody. But somewhere in the middle is some of those scale challenges that Vincent spoke about. And some of the, I don't think it's artificial intelligence. I think it's augmented intelligence. How do we arm our educators to make better decisions? Those text messages at dinner time, how do we automate those? How do we get early signals as to those students that may be struggling? How do we even get early signals about those students that are progressing on a learning path to a career that we've just identified with the economic graph data that's not going to exist in 2 years? How do we help ourselves be more agile through these learning processes? And that's where I think the promise of technology is. And we see quite regularly as we start to digitize more and more of the learning process, we can pick up more and more of these signals from students. And I mean that in a friendly way, not a chip in a student kind of way, that we can identify, hey, it looks like the students that do well in these courses actually attend class, or they actually use the LMS, or based on this student's capability and scores in a certain type of examination, maybe they benefit from a different type of learning content. I think that's where technology can help students, can help us augment what an educator is doing. Again, a well-motivated and well-trained educator who's part of the journey, not having technology thrown at them. I think that's where we get away from this, and Sarah, you mentioned it earlier, the give every student a device and that will solve the problem. That creates inequity, not equity. Ironically, some of the studies suggest that one device between three, a shared device model, actually contributes to collaboration more. It drives some of those softer skills. And then what we're seeing, this is technology available today, is we can understand from the way a student collaborates on the digital platforms with other students or responds to questionnaires, we can measure some of those soft skills as well. Does that student ask open-ended questions? Does that student have a network of collaborators that is more than 5, more than 10? Does that point and give us signals towards other things? So I feel that whilst it's absolutely important to respond and make sure we have access for every student, as we do that, we will see new possibilities. I don't want to set the bar too high. Let's not go AI today, tomorrow. Let's bring everybody on that journey. But at the same time, give back to our educators, give back to our students, and provide that more personalized, student-centered learning experience. I think for me, that's what excites me around what we can do with technology. And if anything, the acceleration of the adoption of technology in the right way can help us accelerate the realization of as well.
Thank you, Rob. The minister this morning also pointed out when he was talking about the role of technology is that technology will not replace humans, but it will replace some of the tasks that we do. And similarly, when it comes to teachers, technology or AI, whatever you want to call it, is not going to replace teachers, but it might replace the ones that don't use AI or technology in their classrooms, right? And that's something that's very important to keep in mind. I think your comment really highlighted that we, of course, going forward, hopefully that the teachers and the educators will be able to use technology better to improve learning outcomes. I want to switch our conversation a bit now towards, reality on the ground in our part of the world, in developing Asia, in Southeast Asia. As we know, ICT infrastructure is not that great, right? So across the countries, there's a huge heterogeneity. And also the skills of folks in terms of IT skills is also not that encouraging. Given this context where, that we were already worried about digital divide even before COVID-19, but now that digital divide, has it widened? Has it gotten worse? Has it become more evident that some are better off than others because they have more access, more incomes? So the income inequality sort of plays into ways that we didn't envision before in the past. And I'm going to invite all the panelists to sort of speak a bit about this, maybe in 90 seconds or less. I'm going to start with Vincent, the digital divide. Vincent, over to you.
So I'm not going to address specifically about the digital divide because there's still a lot of nuances and a lot of thinking that needs to go into this. We must, however, recognize that there is a divide. How to address the divide, that's a separate thing. And it really requires that partnership between the industry, the academia, as well as the government coming in to fund and to run something together. So this requires an effort all around and for us to come together. I think what I want to touch on really is on the skill side, because if there is a divide, then we really need to address the divide from an acquisition of skills perspective as one of the steps. And my reading is this. So I have a hypothesis, and that is this. We've been talking about digital literacy almost in the same breath like numeracy, as well as just literacy, right? So the digital literacy is an essential component of how a young learner is able to operate in a full capacity way. My hypothesis is that looking into the foreseeable future, I think we need to make sure that every learner should also have cloud literacy. And the reason why I'm saying this is that probably the mobile technology is going to be the one that's helping to bridge quite a fair amount of the digital divide. And a lot of that which has been delivered on the mobile actually runs on the cloud. Right? If you think about it, you can book and watch, let's just say you can watch a movie on Netflix on your mobile phone. You can, if outside of the COVID situation, you can book your holidays through Expedia. You can do a meal delivery, whether is it through Deliveroo or through McDonald's. A lot of these services are already running on the cloud. So we are actually already consumer of the cloud.
Right.
We not to train, we not to get people understanding more and more about the cloud and what is it possible for them to do, because it has disrupted industry. It has brought about greater customer experiences, brought about greater engagement. A lot of the learning, I mean, look at what Janine is doing. And I have another EdTech customer by the name of DisTech. They are able to detect very high likelihood if a person has dyslexia just by reading 32 words into a mobile phone, and you'll be able to analyze it for you. Wow, amazing what it can do to parents and for children. It is
right.
Mobile technology is just going to change a lot of things that we're going to do.
All right, thank you, Vincent. I remember listening to those folks when we presented that product. I was really amazed by it too. Like, how can you really diagnose it? Really cool stuff happening in this space. When we talk about the digital divide, maybe it's also there's something that I think one of the speakers in the morning mentioned, that perhaps technology will help countries leapfrog, right? So we tend to think that it's a linear process. You go from having a landline to mobile to maybe a more fancier ways of communicating, but it's not a linear process, a very non-linear process, right? So I take an example of you take any country in developing Asia, developing countries, my own home country, Nepal, where, people started having mobile phones ever before they had landlines, right? So they moved on to mobile phones. So that's an example where maybe we can skip a few steps, that we can move on to something that seems very sophisticated to even an advanced country user, could also be usable in a developing country, limited infrastructure, limited ICT environment as well. Right, so in this space, we need more evidence, we need more products that could work in that space. And let me invite Colin, and then I'll ask Janine to talk about this. Colin, over to you.
Sure, I think it's a great point. And I guess when we think about the digital divide, particularly in emerging markets, frankly, it's also in developed markets in some cases as well. And one of the things that we've seen, particularly in emerging markets, is exactly that leapfrogging that you talked about, right? So for us, for example, for Google Classroom, I think in the month of March, we saw our users go from like 50 million to 100 million. And obviously it's kept on going up since then. But when we look at what's actually happening there, there's been huge use of these platforms via mobile, low-end smartphones, for example. And so they're definitely, the digital divide is something that we really need to focus on and solve for. And there's a lot more training we need to do. We need to get more access. A lot of the telcos in the region have been investing behind support packages, right? Doing data packs for free, et cetera. So a lot of activities there to help with connectivity and other types of access. But it has been very reassuring to see that the numbers are just phenomenal in terms of the depth of use of technology, leveraging, again, smartphones, but a lot of them are, sort of low-end smartphones that are really accessing and heavily interacting in terms of sort of education. I think in the sort of wealthier countries, you also see digital divide issues, and they're able to accommodate them more. So like Japan moving 1-to-1, basically providing devices in a matter of, I think, 9 months for all primary and middle school students. And part of that is actually about generating equal access to technology. So, obviously different countries can approach it in different ways, but, and there's still a lot to do, but there are some encouraging signs.
Thank you, Colin. And it's great to see the encouraging signs on that front. Janine works in sort of low ICT infrastructure environment with low-income learners, low-income users of some of the work that you guys are doing in Indonesia. So can you talk a bit about given your experience working in that type of context? What type of products works well? What make them work? Like, what are the 1 or 2 key things that makes them work, that makes them tick?
Yeah, thank you, Samir, for the question. I think if you think about developing countries, or especially the marginalized communities in developing countries, there are actually a lot of barriers for them to adopt technology, right? And I think the first thing that we need to start is to be realistic about what is possible, and also be cognizant or keep in mind about the time frame that you want your product to be effective. And let me give you an example. And for example, augmented reality or VR is super sexy and it's really exciting. However, if you are talking to implementing an AR/VR solution in Balikpapan, or implementing that solution in Bangladesh, for example, where 80% of the or more of the students' population are only having access to a feature phone, and obviously, that wouldn't work. So I think the first thing is to be very aware of the technology or the hardware that your target audience have access to. So I think that's the first thing, right? I know that there are other models where we introduce, one child, one laptop model, or one child, one tablet model. What I find is it's much better to work with the technology that the local communities already are familiar with, know how to use, and know how to repair or maintain, right? And that will be a lot more sustainable. So be very aware of what technology that the majority of your users have access to. And then second thing is to consider their infrastructure, their network coverage. I think Samir you and other speakers has talked about what infrastructure people might have access to, and Sarah spoke about whether is it a mobile phone, is it radio, is it TV, right? For in India or in Indonesia, a lot of places are covered by mobile phones, but then there's another problem that we need to think about is affordability. Even if there are mobile networks, not everybody are able to pay for that, right? So, of course, Indonesia has done something quite innovative. What they did was to give all students the data package to learn. Now, what can tech practitioners like us do? And so, like what Colin mentioned, and what we do as well, is that we make sure that learning is available for low-end devices. We make sure that is available for offline use and online use, and that will help bridge the digital divide. Actually, technologists or developers are at times guilty, I would say, of widening the divide, because if you don't design for to be inclusive, right, you will have people who can't, especially the apps that requires you to be online all the time in order to learn, or the apps that take up requires a high specs or takes up a significant amount of your memory. That wouldn't work, right? And then the last thing about digital literacy, which Vincent also pointed out. So there are so many EdTech solutions out there, and they're mushrooming everywhere, especially in India. And with all those shining devices, tools, and many of them currently offered for free, the teachers are still using WhatsApp, because it's within their digital literacy, ability, right? It's within reach for them. And we got to know that many people in India are actually just using their phones for WhatsApp and maybe Facebook and some YouTube, that's all. Nothing further than that. So, and in such communities, we see that while we've tried to introduce our educational game platform, it didn't work. But the chat side, the chat teacher worked. So I think just be realistic about, what your target audience can or cannot do at the moment. While training or upskilling teachers is very interesting, but we also need to factor in that, well, that's multi-year to bring them up to speed. So just to be very realistic and practical.
Thank you, Janine. On the point about that you raised, the minister also mentioned this morning about the data package, the free data package that was given for 4 months, and one of the things he highlighted is that it could be maybe similar to a social assistance in times of crisis, right? Data package for students to sort of access EdTech products. So that was one of the support that they gave to students, which I think is a great idea, right? And I like what you said about meeting students where they are, so that we actually have an impact. And the text messaging that you mentioned, the WhatsApp group in India, and I've looked at a little bit of evidence on this. Of course, it's preliminary evidence, right? But as it shows that actually they tend to work pretty well, because you're meeting where people are. They're comfortable using mobile phones, and during our conversations with the folks in Indonesia, we also learned that teachers are way more comfortable when it comes to mobile phones. They are used to mobile phones. So if there's any kind of product that works in a mobile platform, great. But then the minute you move into PC or Macs, scared. They're very scared. They don't want to touch it. And that's very understandable. So, this is something that we also need to take into account when we're developing different types of products. I'm going to move into, there was a few questions that have been raised in the chat box from some of our participants. This is one that we are also been grappling with, and we touched upon this before we went live, I think, where when we talk about skills development, right? So skills development, say for TVET, Polytechnique, in that type of institution where a lot of the learning happens sort of hands-on. You have to, if you want to learn how to fix a car, well, you need to work with a real car, right? Maybe it's changing because of augmented reality, mixed reality, but still, we still need to sort of have some practical assessments or practical tests we need to do before we can certify somebody is actually skilled to do that work. Similarly, when you go into secondary school with science, right? Science classes, experiments. How do you do a physics or chemistry experiment? And how do you make that happen? So how do you do the assessment well? It's critical. So I'm going to ask Rob to speak a bit about this. How can we envision this going forward? Can we mix sort of the need for the hands-on teaching and learning? How much of it can we put it online, virtual? Can you talk a bit about the efforts at your end, Rob?
Sure, I think it's a really critical question. We spend a lot of time talking about skills at the moment. We've launched a global skills initiative across the world to help those impacted by COVID. But I don't, as a student, ever want anyone to ever take away my opportunity to use a Bunsen burner in classroom, okay? But there are some times, especially as those labs may not be available, how do we use technology to potentially simulate these environments? And again, don't just digitize the process, can we use the simulation to teach more? I think there are some real opportunities. We see a number of our partners building gamification platforms, simulation with technology to simulate some of those what were traditionally specific lab environments. I think that's something that we can see built on and accelerated over time. Additionally, we've seen some universities around an example I use is pharmaceuticals. The education was you would go and actually be in a hospital and you would work with pharmacists and that was quite an arduous task. The accessibility of the hours and the ability for a student to go and do that sort of learning and practical placement did limit the accessibility even pre-COVID. But what we're now seeing is simulations of these environments, just simply using things like Teams and having an environment set up and a connection between a pharmacist student and a doctor or a hospital as well. And we're seeing some really providing more practical education around some of these really unique areas, which I think is really important. So to me, the technology opens up opportunities to give more practical education rather than less. I think the last piece is around, and we see this a lot in Singapore, around how we manage the reopening of, and to the question, some of those more specific laboratory environments, some of those locations where you do need to go back to campus. I think technology also offers the support to the institution to enable them to open small parts of the campus as well, to enable social distancing, to use AI, to monitor videos and identify and help implement safe distancing practices, to also help schedule those activities without the burden on people manually, and allow some of those practices to still continue, whilst at the same time trying to address and provide as many of those to be practical as well. And I think this is something, taking that one step further, is the practical skills we are seeing more and more. Education is arguably less and less about the piece of paper and more about the skills. I think this also adds to the private-public partnership conversation as well. And I know one of the other sponsors for the day is Grab. We're doing work with Grab around how do we take the content and curriculum around technology that we have, the ability to provide that learning that a lot of institutions have, and then Grab as an organization to look and say, well, we have data, we have problems that we can solve. How do we provide a mentoring and a practical application of those skills so that students don't just graduate with a theoretical certificate? They have industry certifications as well. In addition, a portfolio of code that they're building in the technology space. So I understand it's a very IT example, but those partnerships are coming together, and we're seeing that acceleration of skills and hopefully leading to better employability of students without adding any burden onto their learning plan.
Thank you, Rob. On the need for sort of practical skills and the how do we make sure that the learning happens using technology, we also take into account the need for sort of hands-on training. One of the things I think the innovation that has taken place in the last several months is also that even in a group, even in a sort of a conference setting, so we got like parallel sessions or the group work that you can do even online. We are sort of we have made progress in sort of improving that technology as well, right? So, and that's a good sign, that because group work in a classroom setting is so important. So now we are moving on to the online setting. Can we do group work in online settings, sort of going sort of parallel sessions happening? So it's a great example as well. I'm going to invite Colin to talk about this a bit more before we move on to the last topic. But on this, the need for sort of yes, we're all excited about technology, and a lot of the parents, teachers, they were unprepared, right? They were largely unprepared when the pandemic hit, when the schools were shut down, national lockdowns. They were largely unprepared. All of a sudden, they were forced, to work at home and then make sure that kids are learning. Can you speak a bit about this? How can we balance going forward? Colin.
Sorry, yeah, it's cutting in and out a little bit there. It was cutting out a little bit onto the last bit. Do you mind just repeating?
No, Rob was just talking about how, we are making progress in terms of thinking about different solutions to balance the need for practical skills or practical sort of training that we need to provide our students, right? Using the example of, science classes, also the TVET type education where, you need to have hands-on training, and then also the soft skills about being able to work well with others and all of that, which is also very critical, right? So how can we improve technology in this space of education technology that also incorporates those features that are critical for learning?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And one of the things we see today, but also previously, is that some of these soft skills, and particularly around collaboration, which is something that we see as a hugely important skill set moving into the next generation of jobs, which we know in 10 years, 20 years, the set of jobs can be quite different. But that core area of collaboration we see is really important. And one of the interesting things that we've seen is that technology, both in the classroom, but also during this period, has allowed for much broader sets of collaboration. So, we think about our tools, we think about other tools as well. The ability of students to be able to communicate and share in real time and build things together actually during this period has increased in some respects. And so one of the things that we see it as being really powerful is actually equalizing in some senses. So in a traditional classroom environment, you have some students who are very active and loud and participate, and some students who have plenty to contribute but are quite shy, right? And so we've seen it in a classroom environment, particularly when you've got devices in a classroom environment, but actually from the data we're looking at, we also see that in this environment, the level of collaboration and therefore the level of sort of collaboration skills that are being built in some cases has actually increased. And so we think that technology can play an important role in sort of equalizing for students, so that again, more shy students are able to collaborate, build those skills, but also build confidence, which maybe in traditional environment wasn't necessarily the case.
Now, that's a great point, Colin. That's a great point. You know, one thing we have seen in the labor market, especially when it comes to disabled workers, is that precisely on this point where the disability is not much of a hindrance anymore because they can work from home and they can actually deliver same extent as anybody else. And so there's sort of, sort of level the playing field. And as you rightly said, in a classroom setting, you're right that some students are quieter than others. And the quiet students now actually can just go on the chat box and ask really excellent questions. And that's exactly what's happening, right? So, one of the things I kind of wanted to ask you, everyone, all the panelists, if you can take maybe 1 minute or less, will this experience, COVID-19 experience, change our education system permanently or not? I'll start with Sarah.
Yeah, I do think it will. I think it has created the opportunity for people to experiment and take risks in areas that they weren't prepared to do before. I think it's created the opportunity for more self-directed learning, for more experiential learning. And I hope that continues after the pandemic. That, again, it's not a replacement for classroom-based technology, but we can certainly enhance and augment the experience and enrich learning outside the classroom by what we know now about communicating and collaborating with technology.
Thank you, Sarah. Rob, over to you.
Yeah, I think I concur. This is the opportunity to try. I think the barriers, the necessity has meant those that may have been hesitant to step with more technology and digitization of learning, that the barrier is broken, they've needed to do that. The data we're seeing, unlike other industries, even when countries are coming out of lockdown and removing restrictions, we're seeing usage of the technology continue. And I'm excited by that because it means it was used in a meaningful manner. And I think we're shifting to a hybrid learning model. So it does feel like we've accelerated the journey for some of our, in some countries. I'm hoping the scars aren't there. I think some people have put in a lot of hours and probably, hopefully, tried and failed some things. But if we can learn from that, I think we can come out of this even stronger.
Thank you, Rob. Janine?
So I'm going to say something a little controversial, right? Perhaps teachers, educators, or policymakers might feel that EdTech practitioners like myself don't involve them in creating products. And this is perhaps a sentiment in different countries that I've heard. Well, from as a EdTech practitioner in the field, unfortunately, I have to say we are a bunch of very innovative, excited, and optimistic people. So for us, in SOLVE, we are very, very conscious in involving educators in our solution as part of our solution and as many stakeholders as possible. And what we would love to see is more conversation like this, and more conversations with multi-stakeholders involved, because this is our opportunity to, like you said, Samir, leapfrog, right? Educators at the moment when they think about EdTech, they might be really thinking, okay, how do I put my classroom, how I used to teach, just make a video of how I teach in the classroom and put it online and get my worksheets out and get it done like as I to quickly think of how I do in the classroom and get it to our students. However, technology has so many more things to offer, right? Like Google Classroom, where the the sheets, the homework can mark itself, right? And so with that out of the way, what more can the teacher do? I think there are just so many possibilities, like my counterparts have mentioned, and with a more collaborative approach, I think we can truly leapfrog and do something really great together.
Thank you, Janine. Colin, over to you on whether this will lead to a permanent change or not, or back to business as usual. When we have the vaccine, we're back at work, everything is fine. What do you think?
So I would say absolutely, it's changing, and it's going to change, and that will sustain. I mean, I would echo both Janine and Rob's points. To Janine's point, I think, traditionally when you go into a classroom environment with technology, one of the things I always found was that there's tremendous local level innovation. So whenever we talk about innovation, we think, oh, we're going to do these cool new products and we're going to big things. The reality is, like, every teacher in every classroom I've ever seen that's using technology is already innovating, doing things different, figuring out ways. And what we've seen is that innovation has, it's been forced on a lot of teachers who weren't ready necessarily for technology, but that's continued. And so we've seen a lot of teachers really starting to engage in meaningful ways with technology. And when we look at the data, and I think this is exactly what Rob was saying, we look at countries, whether it's Korea, whether it's, Taiwan, whether other countries where they have come out of lockdown periods and sort of you've seen transitions to more normal educational systems, the data says it's continuing to increase. So you had an increase with lockdowns, you sometimes have a flattening for a little while, and then you have another increase. So what we're seeing is that the adoption of technology is going to be different when things come back, and it's going to be much more hybrid. But I think that this is a very unfortunate reason to have a forcing factor. But from a long-term perspective, I think that this region is going to come out, and the educational systems will come out of this in a lot stronger place in terms of real understanding of how to use technology in some ways, how not to use technology in other ways, and a lot of local level innovation, whether that's teacher level or sort of lots of ed techs that are doing really interesting things as well.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you. That's very encouraging. Vincent, over to you.
So I truly believe that the train for the change in the education system, or the hybrid model, or the digital transformation of the education system, that train has left the station. Where is it heading? I think it's really up to the school, the educators, the institutions, the country to take that train and the direction to where they want to lead it to. And so this is really a great opportunity for experimentation. This is the time when people will be a little bit more forgiving about making mistakes, because we are all learning in this journey. The other thing that we need to bear in mind as we are all experimenting and learning, we need to be sharing successes with one another. This education system, in essence, it's actually a very, very powerful community if we are able to connect the dots between the different groups of users. We want to connect the innovative teachers with those who are struggling. We want to connect the students who are a little bit ahead with some of their peers that are lagging behind. We want to show schools models that are working, and hopefully they can learn from each other what they can do in their school. But at the end of the day, that change, that innovation, that hybrid model, whatever they want to create, has to be owned by the institution themselves, because no one can own it for them. And we like to think that if we can create a one-size-fit-all type of solution, you work for the entire world, but I think, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. And so, we really got to understand from the institution perspective, from the educator's perspective, from the student's perspective, and then we work backwards so that we can work with them to help solve the problem in their own context and in their own rights. And so that's the only way that we will continue to see the education system transforming and improving from strength to strength. Back to you, Samir.
Thank you, Vincent. I think you might have stolen my concluding remarks. I completely agree that the train has left. Let's hope that it goes to stations that lead us to better places. And this has been a really exciting panel. Thanks to all of you. This is very, very exciting. We've had a discussions over a range of topics. There's a lot to talk about, as Sarah mentioned, that we can have many other panels on EdTech, different aspects of EdTech. But some of the things, like 2 or 3 things, if I want to sort of summarize before, because we're at the top of the hour and it's supposed to end any minute. So one is, COVID-19. I agree with Vincent and all of you that the train has left. Change is going to happen. Whether it's going to be permanent or not, we'll see it. But hopefully we'll arrive at a hybrid model that Colin, Rob, all of you mentioned. So that's one. The second is on digital divide that Janine also mentioned, that maybe we can bridge the gap, maybe we can leapfrog, maybe we can we don't have to be burdened by the past of thinking about there's a digital divide, how can we overcome it? So let's not think of it in a linear term, let's think of it in a non-linear term, right? So maybe we can bridge the digital divide in this space as well. That's the other one. And the last one is on sort of, mixing between the need for practical skills, practical training for students. So coming up with a hybrid type model in terms of skills development, education, all aspects. So really, it's been a very encouraging and exciting discussion. Thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of our participants who have joined us in this discussion. At this point, we have to end our panel discussion, and I think the presentation will be available to all the participants and the video recording as well, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Stay healthy.
Thank you.